Hello, my name is Rodolfo Rivera Munoz. I have developed this program to be all about identity. Identity of my people who are those who were here originally, thousands of years ago, before the Europeans even figured out that the world was not flat. This program has developed as a part of a journey of discovery, a journey which I embarked upon as a very young child, still in Kingsville, my hometown, trying to figure out why those people on the other side of the railroad tracks in Kingsville had all the power, all the money, owned all the real estate, and governed. When I was born in 1945, at the end of World War II, my people were already diverging into two different people. There was the maternal side of my family, my mother's people, who were those people who I now understand had been in the Kingsville area for centuries before the ancestors, the antecedents of the Americans arrived. Before any Europeans even found out about this world, my Rivera ancestors were in the area around Kingsville. The paternal side of the family, on the other hand, the Munoz side, are something that the difficulty in ascertaining what was happening with them has been incredibly emotional. I, perhaps without knowing it at times, was almost torn apart with this inability to understand why some in our society seem to go up so well, up the hierarchy of economics, professional development, attainment of better education, etc. All the indices as to success seem to be more available to the Munoz side than they were to the Riveras. And I never could understand what made that difference. It is because I now understand that I must do everything that I can to obliterate that distinction. For while it might not be so easy to obliterate the distinction between the Europeans, those whom we more readily recognize as los Americanos, the white people, the Yankees, el gringo. Those people have much more to do with the elimination of any differences between me and them than I do. But the Munoz side is a side to which I belong. I am Munoz. My father was Munoz. My father was Mauricio Munoz from the King Ranch, and he came over to Kingsville because he fell in love with my mother. And my mother, I now realize, was this beautiful Indita whose people still didn't know how they had gotten there. Neither did the Munozes, mind you. The Munozes were just as ignorant of how this society had developed up to then. All of us were ignorant. And now, anybody that takes issue with the way I am making a stand should understand that all you have to do is look around you and see the confusion in the entire society out there. Everybody is confused. Even the Republicans no longer know who they are. At one point in time, the Republicans were the more racists, the more out and out haters, the ones that more enthusiastically went about exterminating my people, the Indian, because they saw no reason for us to be here, for us, the way they saw it, to exist as mere obstacles to their development of this world that they saw that they were building here. But neither were the Democrats ever any good for us, any use for us. Whether or not they can be any good to us now depends on an awful lot of things. And in the end, my explanation for the audacity that I now recognize I am assuming, I am acting with pronounced audacity. I am a candidate for the Texas Supreme Court. Why? Because I'm qualified. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that I'm qualified. I can now explain to you, as a result of that development, that I come here to you as the son of my mother, Leonor Munoz, and my grandmother, who were the owners of that land around Kingsville. But since Mr. Richard King arrived and through this magic articulation of boundaries around them, they lost all possibility of ever understanding what was taking place. Those were my people. Those were my people who did not understand either English or Spanish. And so therefore, they survived by avoiding getting killed. And they could get killed for some infraction as simple as saying, "Hey, wait a minute, sir. Mr. Gringo, hey, American. Please understand, I disagree with you. You don't have ownership, or this land's not yours." What could they say? How were they going to say it? At what point did that ever change? Ask yourself. Has it ever changed? I submit to you that it hasn't changed. The Americans, instead of changing their perception that we did not have the same human rights that they did, are instead changing our own mind and understanding about who we are. You, Munoz, they would tell me, you, Munoz, must understand that you are Hispanic. And that if you are going to succeed in any way in this society, you have to accept and acquiesce in that, Munoz. Why? Because we're in control. We gringos, we Americans, we exemplary people of this United States of North America, we are in charge here. We're in control. You lost already. Gosh, nobody ever told me that. Nobody ever explained to me in school, in the University of California, anywhere. Nobody ever told me, "Hey, Munoz, we took it away from you, man. It's too late, Munoz. It's too late for you. We deceived you. We hoodwinked you. We brainwashed you. However it was, or through all those ways, we took it away from you." Well, excuse me. Wait a minute. One more time. Wait a minute, please. What is it that I'm doing here over the air? Why am I making this spectacle? Como decían mis tíos y tías, ¿a qué pantominas haces, sobrino? I have to make a spectacle. I have to do what I have to do because I've been trying it every other way. I've approached your American government. I've approached all your government from the local city government to the state to the national. I've approached your state bar association, of which I am a member. I am still a member in good standing. I can practice law. I can do anything that any other lawyer can do. The distinguishing factor between lawyers, your lawyers, American lawyers, has to do with who you know, who you have indebted to you, and so forth and so on. And you that are female, perhaps gays and lesbians, or some other so-called minority. I'm not a minority, understand that. I'm not a minority. I am Indian. My people were here before you Americans arrived and started separating everybody, calling everybody, giving everybody different articulations, saying these people, originally, here's what you said. In 1776, none of your founding fathers considered themselves my equal or my ancestors' equal. They didn't consider those Indians around the fort at Jamestown their equal. They didn't consider any of the Indian nations around them to be populated with human beings just like them. And if you know your history, you know that when those people arrived, they didn't have rights. They didn't have rights, any kind of rights, much less human rights. They were subjects of the King of England. And the King of England, your own history tells us, the King of England could say, chop his head off. He looked askance at my wife. And so his head would come off. His head would come off and there was no appeal anywhere. There was no due process. There was nothing that offender could do. All that legal development came afterwards. Even 100 years after they had landed at Jamestown, your ancestors still didn't know what they were going to do or what they needed to do. But it was around that time that they started to realize that, hey, you know, the Spanish with a few mounted soldiers with harquebush and swords conquered Tenochtitlan. A few mounted soldiers could go throughout this country and wreak havoc amongst these people. A part of it was because of the plagues, the illnesses they brought, and how devastating that was to the local people. Your own records, your own authorities will tell you that perhaps 90% or more of our people vanished, were exterminated by those illnesses that you brought over, that your ancestors brought over. But that was not all that happened. That merely allowed you a rationalization. Your people rationalized, and that is what your founding fathers did in 1776 when they started to say, hey, those of us who are here now, who own land, we're landowners. Just like the royals back in England. We're landowners, and we're white, and we're male. And because of those characteristics, that elevates us above the rest of the women, the gays and lesbians, the black slaves, and most definitely the Indians. That's consistent. That is what they were thinking. That is what they did. The rationalizations have come later, and they've come later listen to me, please. Because this is where I put my neck on the line. This is where as I told your local federal judges, this is where I'm committing professional suicide. Because I honestly believe that I have to do this. And that is that no matter what the consequences are, I have to state this. I have to do what I am here doing. I spent the last 20 years of my life, at least, if not more, trying to litigate the issue, hoping to attain at least the understanding of the gringos in control, the white people in control, the Americans in control. I tried to persuade them, hey, listen, please. These issues need to be litigated. I don't think I'm completely off. I don't think I'm crazy. I don't think I'm paranoid even. Although I have every cause to be. I honestly believe that my people were here. And you know what? I went to UCLA Law School after getting a BA degree. After getting a BA degree, I went to UCLA Law School for 3 years. I've practiced in Texas for 30 years. I understand what the law is. I know what the rule of law is. You're not practicing it, Americans. You're not doing it. The only thing that you're doing is you're keeping what you call troublemakers like me out. There is no longer any doubt in my mind but that you are keeping me out because I am like Cochise, Geronimo, Chief Joseph, and Benito Juarez. I don't pretend that, I don't want anybody to come back and rub it in my face that I haven't achieved anything like those people have. All I'm saying is that I am to this system what those relatives of my ancestors were. I submit to you that part of the reason for my being that is education, your educational system, who have tried to do what I am still trying to do here and now. Try to do something that stopped that mad rush to wherever it is that you Americans are going. There was a time when maybe getting Jamestown established would have done it. You convinced yourself, hey, we need to establish a secure beach front, a beach enclave at least, so that we can trade with the Indians and develop some of those commercial advantages that Spain is extracting from down south. Let me take a step away from the intense, because I can get completely intense about this. I am passionate because it's my life, but I need to focus more and more upon education. So I want to now show you this clip, which in a way makes everything that I'm concerned about, that I'm complaining about, that I know was active upon me in a horrible way as I grew up and I matriculated through the educational system, but that it approach is being hilarious does not make it any the less true.
All right, listen up, y'all. I'm y'all substitute teacher, Mr. Garvey. I taught school for 20 years in the inner city, so don't even think about messing with me. Y'all feel me? Okay, let's take roll here. Jay Quellen. Where's Jay Quellen at? No Jay Quellen here? Yeah.
Do you mean Jacqueline?
Okay, so that's how it's gonna be. Y'all wanna play? Okay then. I got my eye on you, Jay Quellen. Balake. Where is Balake at? No Balake here today. Yes, sir.
My name is Blake.
Are you out of your goddamn mind?
Blake?
What? Do you want to go to war, Balake? Because we could go to war.
No.
I'm for real. I'm for real. So you better check yourself. D nice. Is there a D nice? If one of y'all says some silly ass name, this whole class is gonna feel my wrath. Now D nice.
Do you mean Denise?
You say your name right now.
Denise?
Say it right.
Denise.
Correctly.
Denise.
Right.
Denise.
Right.
D nice.
That's better. Thank you. Now, Aaron, where are you? Where is Aaron right now? No Aaron, huh? Well, you better be sick, dead, or mute, Aaron. Aaron. Oh, yeah. Why didn't you answer me the first time I said it? Huh? I'm just asking you. I said it like 4 times. So why didn't you say it the first time I said Aaron?
Because it's pronounced Aaron?
Son of a bitch! You done messed up, Aaron! Now take your ass on down to Oshag Hennessy's office right now and tell him exactly what you did. Oshag Hennessy!
Principal O'Shaughnessy?
Get out of my goddamn classroom before I break my foot off in your ass! Insubordinate and churlish. Timothy.
Present.
Thank you.
How is it that I am running for the Texas Supreme Court? I am a candidate to become a justice on the Texas Supreme Court. When I've been developing this program over the air throughout this San Antonio area of Texas, and I've brought this to the point where I unequivocally assert the state of Texas is void ab initio. That's lawyer speak for from the get-go. The assertion being that since the so-called Texians, the people that you claim, that Americans claim created the state of Texas, came here and acted as if there was no people here. The fact that my people were here nullifies all that. Because if, as per the rules that the Europeans brought from Europe, the whole thing about the entire concept of the rule of law is based primarily upon the development of government being one of the people, by the people, and for the people. You've heard the phrase countless times. Your politicians are always talking about the rule of law. they keep talking over and over about we the people and how power to the people and we should be the ones that govern. And in particular nowadays you hear all this serious condemning of Washington and the central government or the federal government. So then it's just right to address the issue of why am I posturing myself for the Texas Supreme Court? The short explanation is because I don't make the rules. The longer explanation is because I refuse to continue to be articulated out of existence by your government. I refuse to have the Americans, the invader Americans into Texas, do all the articulating simply because they started coming here at a time when we didn't know what was happening. My people did not know what was happening. And your people came over convinced that because we did not know what was happening, that therefore that established a premise which you've availed to impose your government and to dictate to us how you were going to get rid of us. And that's what you have been doing, and that is what is still today going on. Consider the situation. Nobody any longer disputes the fact that my ancestors were here. My people, those whom you and the rest of the European invaders of the Western Hemisphere have denominated the Coahuiltecan Indians. That's what you called us. I am just essentially going by the facts, the history that your American experts agree is what took place. I am not adding anything different. I am not changing anything. What simply happened is that it has been your government, your courts in particular, which have been doing all the interpretations. And they've been doing those interpretations premised upon me and my people not being human right imbued. You had all kinds of discussions amongst yourself about whether or not we were civilized, whether or not we were competent. The bottom line is that you were articulating, you as Europeans, the invaders, all those of you from colonizing countries such as England, Spain, France, etc. Those countries, colonizers, rationalized what they were doing. And they rationalized it because your history tells us that as they made contact through Columbus, that at that point your ancestors, the Europeans, had invented printing. And because of that printing, it was like the internet today, and it was an incredible flowering, sprouting forth of communication and the democratizing in a way of data, knowledge, so that Europeans went from the situation where they were under the governance of the king, of the monarch, to where they started developing individual rights. So this was taking place between contact 1492 and Jamestown, for example, during which time, again, the same history that you're taught in high school. I'm not changing anything. that history teaches you that in the meantime, the Spanish over there were getting rich, exploiting. They weren't claiming anything except the right to exploit. And so Spain was getting really filthy rich and so powerful that everybody else, France, the other Europeans, the English, were worried that sooner or later they were going to end up mere conquests of Spain. And so they started to compete with Spain. We know that. They started to compete with Spain, and that's how come the English established Jamestown where they did. They knew now, by the time they established Jamestown, that this continent was huge. They knew that there was all the way to the North Pole, but they knew that the North Pole was much more difficult a climate, harder to survive. And on the other side, down in Central America, what is now Central America, the Spanish were developing that place completely. They were exploiting it, and they had created their fortifications. And so the English needed a place somewhere in between there, because think about the situation that leads us to where we're at today. And the situation then, at that point where the English start competing with the Spanish for means to exploit the land here in North America, because that's all they were doing at the time. They were just interested in getting in on the exploitation, taking some of those resources and taking them back home so that they could do something with them. And it was in the course of doing that that they established Jamestown, in between the North Pole and that place over there where you were too likely to be embroiled from the get-go in a serious war with Spain. All right, so we know that general history. But what I'm trying to do here, and this may not have been as clear the last 20 years that I've been producing this program, because I did not understand completely where I was going or where I was going to end up at. I knew one thing, and this is the reason why I bring education into the situation. Because I know that it all has to do with what we understand. I am a lawyer practicing law. I understand what the rule of law is because I am a lawyer. And because of who I am and what happened to my people at the hands of your people, the Americans, I also know, perhaps better than many of you, what the difference between the theory of the rule of law and what has actually been applied is, what those differences are. And those differences have to do with understanding, with knowledge, with access to knowledge. Because I am going to show you that the Europeans, your antecedents, when they get to the point, this proceeding chronologically, this point where they decide to make Jamestown in order to compete with Spain, at this point there is still no rule of law. There is no international rule. There is nothing that even supposedly or pretendedly or in any way applies to establish how those different nations, either in Europe or in North America or in the Americas, are going to comport themselves towards each other. In regards to the Europeans, we know because Columbus emphasized as much. Columbus considered himself the admiral of the whole thing without even knowing how much was there. His king had promised it to him, and it was like the spoils of war or something like that. By arriving there and claiming it, it supposedly belonged to him. And that is the way all the Europeans thought. So that this is a critical factor that is left out in how you are taught, how Americans are taught history and so forth and so on. Because chronologically, at this point where the English are in Jamestown and the French are in the inside, close to the Mississippi or up through Canada, and the Spanish are down in Central America, they're there just by the power of their arms. They're there at the mercy of the local people. And by the way, another critical factor that you are not explained about is we are told a lot today about international rights, such as the right to self-determination, the right to self-govern, rights that are ignored completely even today by not only your government but your academics. Your academia still today talks about the Indians as if they were one race of people. As a matter of fact, the legal encyclopedias address them that way. They say these was the race of people that the Europeans found when they come over here. Understand now that even today they are still treating everybody like they were all one race and they were all inferior and they were all therefore the legal term incompetent. But going back to the chronology is that sequence where England and France start trying to trade with the Indians, take home pelts, furs, things of that nature. Eventually the English develop tobacco as a commodity and other things develop. But it is gradual. It is an insidious development. And it's insidious because even now, your academics, and most particularly your judiciary, your entire judiciary does not explain these things. And it avoids them. And let me show you why. The reason that France and England went as far north to get away from Spain or the Spanish enclaves in Central America was because it was still a might makes right world. In other words, Spain, when he arrived, Spain said, hey, the whole thing's for me. It's mine. My monarch back in Spain, I claim it in his name. And so therefore, I hereby instantaneously, supposedly, declare everything from the South Pole to the North Pole that's in front of me. He didn't understand that it was more than just the Caribbean where he had landed. He didn't understand that it was more than just El Salvador where he had landed, one of the islands on the Mediterranean. He didn't know about the mainland, but he just declared it all. All that was there belonged to him now, him and his monarch back in Europe. The reason he was claiming it is because he was convinced that he could kill all the Indians on those islands whenever he wanted. And he says that, he records that in his ship's logs. He says, with 50 men, we could do with them whatever we want to. We could make them do whatever we want to. It was all a matter of what you could do with the power of your arms, your weapons, your arquebus, the steel swords, and so forth and so on, which the native people did not have. That was the operation that they were under. They were operating under the paradigm that might makes right. If Spain got here first, then when France and England are thinking about coming over here and starting to compete with the Spanish because they think there's too much there for Spain to protect it all, that's another one of those legal terms which the lawyers, the judiciary has developed into these incredibly powerful terms. Protection. Because when Columbus claimed the whole thing, he says, it's ours because of the might of my king back in Spain. And so when France and Spain are interceding there to form Jamestown, they understand that. They understand that if they go too close to where Spain is, if they attack Tenochtitlan, what is now Mexico City, the Spanish are the ones that have the right. They have the right to protect what they've got. They have the right to protect their claims to the whole thing. And that's all they are. They're just claims. If they could have, they would have picked up the whole thing and carried it to Spain and said, here, this is ours. That's the frame of mind that they were in. And so when France and England are establishing their enclaves in it, they agree. They understand that. And they accept it. And so they go far enough away from Spain so that they think that their own might, that army and that navy and those power of the arms of the English, they hope will keep Spain thinking, I better just concentrate on exploiting around Central America, where I'm already well established at. Let the English do whatever they're going to do over there. But understand what is happening. The Spanish got here first, and so what they had, they didn't have any rights. The only right was that right of the superior weaponry. But they were claiming everything. They were claiming all the way up to the North Pole. If you will remember the divisions made by the Pope, the Roman Catholic Church was the only one that felt that they had authority, over the Spanish. And so the Roman Catholic Pope divided the claims of Spain and Portugal. And that's how Portugal ends up claiming some far south parts of South America. And the rest of it supposedly was given to Spain. And so eventually we get to the point where Queen Elizabeth herself is considering the claim that, hey, look, you're intruding upon territory of Spain. At which point they develop a application that is critical to what happens afterwards also, and which lawyers forget and miss, which I have to admit I myself was missing up until recently, when I realized that all of them knew that it was all a matter of what you could take. And so therefore, what England is doing is simply saying, I have enough power. The force of my armies and my navy is enough that if I go far enough away from Central America, from Tenochtitlan, from the central of the power of the Spanish Empire, then there's an equilibrium there where, because of how difficult it is to come over here and fight us, they'll leave us alone. And that is an acknowledgement. It is an acknowledgement that the Spanish acquired that jurisdiction. They later call it the right to extinguish the claims of the Indians, the rights to extinguish the claims of our people. That's the way they've developed it. And they've developed it that way because they've been developing it in ex parte fashion by themselves. We have not been involved. You have Indians who are really, really excellent scholars and who have law licenses and so forth and so on. Don't get me wrong. I'm not taking anything away from them. I have learned a lot from them, and without them I would not be where I'm at. But understand this also. I am the first Indian with the law license, practicing law, to file pleadings saying, look, I am not one of your people. I am not an American. The reason I am running for the Texas Supreme Court is because I am qualified. Why am I qualified? Because although one of those requirements is that I be a citizen, I am that. I was born here. Again, my people were here before you Americans even came. But nevertheless, because I am Indian, your law makes me a statutory citizen. But there's no distinction in your requirements. The requirement to be a candidate on the Supreme Court, insofar as citizenship is concerned, requires citizenship, period. Okay, so I'm a statutory Indian, I'm a statutory American, statutory citizen of the state of Texas, because the U.S. Congress said so. Mind you, the distinction for those non-lawyers, let me try to go through this carefully, so let's see if I can help you understand. The distinction is that we are still trying to articulate who the people are, who the people of the place in issue are. Remember how your government developed. Those 13 colonies over there, and they said, oh, okay, they were rebelling against England. They weren't rebelling, or let me correct that. They were not rebelling. By their own declarations in those, the original form, the Articles of Association that they made before they made the Constitution. Those articles say, they start off, we, your loyal subjects, because that's all they were. They were just subjects of the King of England. They were not even anything else. They had no rights. Under that system of government, all the rights belong to the monarchs, to the kings. And so they are competing with Spain in this way. And so when they come to the issue about, well, but do we have any right to claim this enclave, to establish Jamestown and say that it's ours? they say, their courts say, their government says, yes, we don't accept this gift of the Pope, of the Catholic Pope. We don't accept the gift of the whole thing, of the whole Western Hemisphere to Spain. We reject that authority of the Catholic Church, of the Catholic Pope, to give it all to Spain. And that's what Queen Elizabeth says. And that's how come they established Jamestown. And that's how come it sprouted forth to become the 13 colonies. They didn't intend from the very beginning to do that. All they were trying to do was trying to figure out how to compete with Spain in exploiting the place. They needed some of those riches that Spain was getting, because Spain was getting too powerful. And so they started with an enclave to compete. But as time develops, and I'm jumping through large portions of the history, to where I jump to the point where in 1776, those people in the 13 colonies start protesting what the English Parliament is doing, taxing them too much and that kind of thing. But nothing has changed insofar as their rights, any rights to claim all that land. It still belongs to the Indians, no matter what they say, unless they have some legal argument. And that yet needs to be developed, at least insofar as Texas is concerned. But let's go back to the 13 colonies. So they start protesting, and then eventually they start fighting, because England sends troops over and they're fighting a war. It dawns on the founding fathers, your founding fathers, it dawns on them, hey, look, here's Spain, France, England, Portugal, all these Europeans are lined up. They're already colonizing. And there's no doubt that between all of us, we're going to take over the whole Western Hemisphere. Why shouldn't we be in on it? We're the ones that removed them from here. And so therefore, there's no reason why we shouldn't be reaping the benefits for ourselves. And so it occurred to them, well, look, the whole continent's going to be taken over. It's obvious. Look at what's already taken place, and look at how the Europeans are poised to take over. Nobody said anything about legalities. But wait, up to this point, in Europe, the Europeans have been talking about what legitimate government is. What legitimate government is, and how those things that eventually lead up to becoming the rule of law. And they realize one more thing. They realize all these people in the Western Hemisphere, because it was much bigger than Europe, and because it had many, many nations of people in them, they nevertheless, this is where they started to nevertheless treat them all as one race of people. And they were going to say now, hey, this race of people doesn't know about the rule of law. They don't know what we are articulating about the rule of law, about how it is only the people of a place in issue, of any given place in issue. Those people are its citizens. They are what we now call the ultimate sovereign. They are the only ones that have a right to make a government for themselves. That's under the rules of international law, self-governance. the right to self-determination. It's a well-established, well-recognized right. But the Europeans didn't want to be bound by it. And so they said, look, this is what has created problems for me in my presentations before your courts. That is why we're going to be duplicative. This is where the native people, in a justified way, started calling the European, the invader, one who speaks with a forked tongue out of both sides of his mouth. Because there is no doubt that they were lies, and there are lies, were lies that are effective to this very day. So that if you look at my pleadings, at the things that I write in court, the petitions that I submit in court, I've been talking about the discovery doctrine as if it should apply. The discovery doctrine was what Columbus was functioning under. Columbus was functioning under the idea that, hey, if I come to a place, if I say that he got to the moon, and he was the first one to get there, it's uninhabited. So he can claim it. He discovered it. It was that kind of a rationalization that he was making. But then, and they all made it. That's what the discovery doctrine is. It was something that the Europeans adhered to, that any of them that found vacant land could claim it. So when they come here, they are lined up and they now know that there are millions and millions of Indians here. Although maybe a large part of those millions have been exterminated by the disease, by the plagues that they brought over. Nevertheless, there's still millions of Indians there. Well, that's where the rationalizations come in. That's where the single-sided development of this entire articulation of what the law is started to take place. This is a corrupt system because it refuses to admit and recognize our historical exclusion as a people. Instead of admitting, hey, Munoz's ancestors, even if running around largely naked and eating dirt, were still no less human beings than those invaders which came here from Europe. The crux of the fraud and deception that is taking place is this argument that only those of our people who admit being American are representative of your society as you want to portray it to the world today.